First, today's headline news. Some 370,000 soft coal miners refuse to work today.
Lawrence into the windup. Here's his pitch. High fly ball to left field. Robinson now backing up to the edge of the turf, goes up halfway, waits, and makes the catch for the out to retire the side. Side retired in order. No runs, no hits, no errors, and none left on. And at the end of a half-inning of play, it's Brooklyn nothing, and the Redlegs coming to bat.
Throughout our lives, we create artifacts, perhaps out of a desire to capture a moment, a person, a feeling, as it was experienced, to share it with those who were not present, to provide proof that it happened. Yet all of our pictures, our videos, our written words can never viscerally relive the relationship as it was in that moment. It happens, then it's gone. Yet our memories, the reminders of that which was, stay with us, allowing us to reiterate in daily conversation that which we find meaningful. The following narratives were told by elders, men and women who are experiencing varying levels of memory loss, some diagnosed, others not. They are seeking to remember those who fear they will no longer be real to those left behind as their own memories fade. This film seeks to both share these memories and illuminate this human struggle, to open dialogue about human memory, relationships, and mortality.
I most worry about forgetting my father.
I was my mother's last child. I mean, she had one more after me, Johnny, but he was a stillborn. And my kids will remember me and my mother. I mean, she died at 87. And they are always posting on her Facebook page saying how much they miss her. I mean, they do that for my sister Bianca, too. Her kids, my nieces and nephews, they miss her. I mean, her daughters just ache for her. And before my other sister Maria also passed, they would try calling Maria or me when they missed her, but you really only have one mother. And it doesn't matter how old she is, a girl needs her mother. I mean, a boy does too, but it's hard to learn to be an old woman without seeing your mother do it first. Bianca died of breast cancer years ago. She ignored that lump for so long. But no one ever posts anything on my father's birthday. His grandchildren were all too young. They don't remember him. He was quiet, and I guess moody, but that's just how a lot of fathers were. They didn't talk much. I think part of it might have been being embarrassed by their accents. They wanted to be American, not Italian, and hated that their voices gave them away. I was bilingual growing up, Italian and English. You probably figured that out already, though. You must be a smart girl to be a professor. So I could speak English and Italian, and I would just speak Italian at home because it was easier. But Pa hated that. I remember once, he couldn't understand what I was saying in English to him, so I said in Italian, and he threw his spoon at me. He wanted us to speak English so that he could learn it. He didn't want anyone to speak Italian to him. Little did he know how sad my kids would be that I didn't speak Italian to them. They would love to be bilingual. That's cool nowadays. So is being Italian. And my father would never believe that either. That in a generation, people wouldn't even care. And he faced a lot of prejudice. But I'm sad that no one will see him like he was. You can't see how bright blue his eyes were. I mean, my sister has blue eyes too, but not that bright blue of his. And they really were beautiful. And his wavy black hair, he was a sight to see. Pictures don't do him justice. And he was quiet. He would just sit in his chair after dinner, drinking wine and listening to the radio. He worked as a bricklayer, so when he got home, he was just really tired, I think. He didn't even really talk much to my mother. Not that I saw anywhere. Heard, I should say. He worked really hard for us to be able to have his dream. His father was murdered by robbers. Well, they were pickpockets, really. It was just one bad knife wound. I think it was by teenagers. He was on his way home from work. But my father was 13 when he lost him. And he worked so hard to earn the money for the boat trip to America. And he promised his sweetheart that he'd be back for her. But when he came back to get her to marry her and bring her back to New York, because he had a 2-bedroom apartment and a good job laying bricks, he found out that she had been seeing other men and was almost engaged to someone else, an older man who could provide for her in Italy. And he was heartbroken, but practical. He was there 2 weeks, asked around until he found my mother, a nice girl, wasn't promised to anyone, and he took her out, asked my grandfather for her hand in marriage that night. And he said, all right, since it came with a trip to America. Her family was poor. If both our families weren't poor, they'd probably still be over there. But my father loved her, and he worked so hard. I mean, he was all aches and pains, and, I think the wine helped with that. But no, he was devoted to her, and he built a life for her. And he's the reason there are over 200 of us in just 3 generations. He brought his sister and 3 of his cousins over as well, paid for their tickets and sponsored them. He loved his family so much. His sister and cousins are gone now, though. Father worked so hard to grow my mother the grapes and tomatoes she missed from home. He used to think he thought it was impossible. The dirt is just different here. The taste, it must be in the dirt. My mother cried every day for years after he died. I was the only one still home to see it. He's not the one we tell stories about. He didn't say much, but he had a big smile and a soft, deep laugh and light blue eyes, almost the color of the sky. You can't know all that from an old black and white picture. So few of us left remember him. I mean, sure, my kids will remember me and my mother, but no one's left that will remember Pa. And he's worth remembering just as much as Ma. Fathers were just different, I hope they listen to this.
You think they'll listen to it? I don't know how much longer I'll be able to be like this.
Lorraine and I had no children. We just couldn't.
There were mean rumors going around that my Lorraine was just too vain to have children, or scared of losing her figure, or share my affection, but that's not true. That's just jealousy over the prettiest girl in a small town.
Fred, that's nonsense.
It was true. No one understood why the prettiest girl in town fell in love with me.
Don't listen to a word of that. We just couldn't have children. We don't know why. We just couldn't. It just wasn't meant to be.
We tried hard enough.
Fred.
One regret I have is not taking in my brother's boy, Terrence. My brother, God rest his soul, was a drunk, and Terrence's mother died in childbirth, and Terrence was really left on his own, so Lorraine and I, we looked after him some.
Yeah, Terrence. Terrence was a good boy. We bought him clothes for school. We had him home for dinner almost every night, and he'd usually sleep over. He was like ours for a while.
He loved to hunt. I taught him how to shoot, and I bought him a gun. And the first deer he ever shot, he was only about 9, and he wanted to help me dress it. Thought for sure he'd get all squeamish when I gave him the heart and the liver and the lungs to go rinse off in the river, but he didn't. He ran right up and right back. He said the snappers swam up as he was rinsing them, and he was so proud. Around that time, when Terrence was a teenager, he started really depending on Lorraine and I for a lot growing up. We gave him good Christmases, new clothes, baseball glove. We loved him like our own.
We did. I used to watch the kids in the town grow up, and I kind of viewed them like my grandchildren. I don't know how they viewed me, but that's how I saw them. But Terrence, he was like our son.
On his 12th birthday, he asked if he could come live with us. If he could stay in his room. It was the one to the left of the stairs, and he had us painted blue. And I told him I'd talk to his father about adopting him, and so I talked to my brother Richard and asked him if I could adopt Terrence, and he said no way. That was his boy, and that he could come stay with us as much as he wanted, but there was no way he was going to give him up. So I told him that if I was going to take Terrence in, I wanted Lorraine and I to raise him as our own. I wasn't going to risk it. You see, often when Terrence would stay the night, Richard, after he'd been on the bottle, would show up at our house in the wee hours of the morning, raising a ruckus, demanding to see his boy, that I didn't have kids of my own and that I was taking his from him. And it would just wake up the whole street, and Lorraine and I would just be so embarrassed by it all.
People talk in a small town. So Fred and I, we talked it over, and we decided that if he wasn't going to let us adopt Terrence, he wasn't going to stay with us anymore. I mean, we would still treat him like family, but we just couldn't deal with the heartache of dealing with Fred's brother. He was just a nasty drunk, just so nasty.
So we talked to Terrence, and we told him that he could come by and sleep over, but we didn't feel comfortable having him move in if Richard wouldn't let us adopt him. And he didn't really come around as much after that. Not really. We'd see him, but not like we did. And around that time, he started drinking with his father. Well, a few years later. All the time runs together, and he just took to it. It's in the blood, I guess. And some years later, there was some kind of an accident at his house, and he was out back with his gun, and somehow he shot it, or it went off, and he died. By that time, he'd become a real troublemaker, known for causing some problems and some stealing, but nothing major, really. Folks just thought he wasn't a good egg. No one really even seemed too surprised or upset over it. And after that, my brother died from liver cancer after that. And looking back, I keep thinking of how Lorraine and I could have handled Richard showing up at our house, embarrassing us in front of our neighbors looking for Terrence.
We could. I mean, they're all dead now anyway.
Maybe we made the wrong decision.
We did. You just feel like things are so much more important when you have more time.
I feel like Terrence is dying all over again with me. I don't think anyone else even bothered to remember him, and after me, he's gone too. He's leaving already, and can't really recall him like I could. It's been so long.
Fred, I will remember him as long as I can.
But that was my boy. That really was my blood. Did you get all that? Now someone can remember him. He was quite the hunter, good boy with a big smile. Could have been something special.
He was something special.
She was our oldest daughter, and I never thought. Our granddaughter has just come out.
She's been a tomboy since she was little. I mean, it was no surprise to me that she was lesbian because she cuts, well, of course, I had my hair cut short, but she kind of has a boyish cut. Well, it used to be down to here, but it got shorter and shorter and shorter, and she's a great athlete. She plays for her university basketball team, and where was I going with all this? What about Regina? With Regina, I never had any inkling because she's very well-rounded and very loving and caring, and I always thought she would be a great mother. She dated regularly in high school and college. She had a boyfriend, so it was after she was working. Now, she worked for the Durham County Health Department as the HIV/AIDS educator, and one time we went to visit her, and she had a woman with her, and we kind of began to think at the time they had a special relationship, but of course we didn't know. And then she came home one weekend and just said she was living with her partner, and that was who she was. It was interesting, I think, in our reactions because I was more disappointed. Now, this was how many years ago? The first thing that came to my mind is that she would never be a mother. And of course, now a lot of lesbian couples have babies, but at that time, Regina's never going to have a family or children, and she would make a wonderful mother. Hank's reaction was more, how much prejudice is she run into, and what are people going to think about her? I don't think it ever stood in the way of who she was. And the thing was, she passed away. She had a brain aneurysm, which was just such a shock. She had been to work, and she was going to a covered dish supper, and it had made her thing. And she and what was her partner's name? Oh, wasn't that terrible? Well, that relationship had ended, which I was very sad about. So she was going to this supper, and Rachel was going with her, and they were going together, but Rachel called because she didn't show up, and when she went over, she found Regina had died, and it was called a berry aneurysm in the back of the brain that just burst. Of course, that was such a shock to us, and I was very, very proud of her. She would go everywhere, from the junior high to state senate, and talking about HIV and AIDS, trying to get a clean needle program so people wouldn't get infections from the needles. And in fact, one time they interviewed her on CNN because she came up with the idea of putting condoms in the barber shops, make it so people would have safe sex and not contract or spread HIV. And I've heard of other people doing that since. So she was very community active, and she tried to get a group of gay and lesbian high school students so they could have a club or an organization anyway. And she was a very loving and caring person. And she was artistic too. My sister was artistic. I was never very much artistic, but Regina got those genes. She could draw and do things like that. So anyway, she was multi-talented, and she was an inspiration to me. We started this program at church to include the gay members. Well, not only include, but embrace them while she was still alive. And of course she died somewhere along the line, but she was my inspiration for starting this at church. And I guess another thing is thinking about death and mortality. I've strayed a long way from the basic tenets of Christianity, but I don't believe in heaven. I don't believe there's somewhere I'd love to see. We lost our daughter, who was lesbian, and my father and mother and sister, and I'd love to think if I went before Hank, or if he went before I did, that I could see them again, but to me that's not realistic. I'm too much of a factual person, I guess, to think that's actually going to happen. Someone at church talked about a room in your heart, and I thought that was great because you can keep a room in your heart to think about the loved ones you've lost in your life, but to me that's not realistic. But it is what it is. Once my mind is gone, my heart is too, and that's not comforting. You got that?
And we had another fellow in my class that was strange.
His name was, I won't tell you his last name. His first name was Chandler. And there was a big boy sitting back in the corner. And he had a big desk. And he had a hawkbill knife about that long. And you could sling it open, you know? But he carved on that desk all the time. Paid no attention to the teacher, apparently. And my curiosity got the best of me. So I asked my father, what about Chandler Wentmore? And he said, well, Chandler's a big-sized boy, I know. And he said, he's got the meanest mother, or woman for a mother, that I've ever known. He said she decided early on that her kids were just not going to go to school. So he got away with it for several years, and they elected a new sheriff. And he wasn't going to put up with that sort of thing. So he went over there. She kept him home, and she kept him home. The principal reported it to the sheriff. So the sheriff went over there to talk to his mother. She said, I'm not going to let him go to school. He'll learn and get in all sorts of mischief. And you've noticed he likes to carve, and people regard that as sort of strange. He's bigger than they are, and if they're gonna fight, he'll just beat them up. I know how that goes. She says, my family's had enough trouble, and I'm not going to let him go. So the sheriff said, I'll give you a few days to think about it. And if you decide that your son is still not going to go to school, we'll come down, we'll get you, and we'll take you to the jail in Marshall City. And we'll keep you there until you decide that your son can go to school. That's the law. So come the day, she suffered the violence of jail for about 2 or 3 days. Then she asked to speak to the sheriff. She said, well, Chandler can go to school if we meet a few terms and conditions. The sheriff said, no. There's no terms and conditions as far as I'm concerned. She said, well, I don't think you'll mind these. They're for keeping Chandler happy and satisfied while he's in school. She said, number 1, at the beginning of every year, you'll furnish Chandler with a new desk to carve on. The sheriff said, that's doubtful, but go on. She said, he will not get any of his homework. He will not answer any questions. If you call on him, he will not answer. He'll not engage in any plays or anything else you like to do because he likes to carve. Well, the other principals had trouble with the fellow, obviously. So he said, well, if that's the best we can do. But I'm telling you, if he misses 1 day of school, unless there's a good medical reason, he better be in his chair when classes come open. Now, as far as participating in class, the law doesn't say he has to participate. It says he has to go to school. So Chandler was enrolled in a very strange curriculum. He didn't have to do anything. And he didn't. And he got by with that for a while until the water level was beginning to rise a few towns over. And it would take about 1.5 years for the water to fill up the entire reservoir. And Chandler liked to drive his mother's old Packard. She had an old, worn-out Packard that he would drive around and work on part of the time. But he disappeared with it. And they were about to have to move out. And they were worried to death about it. Well, he never did come home. He never did come home. In the fall of the year, the leaves fell off the trees. And going across town, the road climbed up high on a mountain and swung around curves and points. A very steep and precipitous road. And somebody passing by saw what appeared to be a car in the water. So they called the sheriff. The sheriff came down. It was Chandler's car, and Chandler was in the car. And he had intentionally steered the car off the highest point above the river and knocked down every tree in front of him until he hit the river and turned upside down. So it was an intentional thing, no doubt about it. I think about him a lot. I'm not sure why he's so on my mind. But really, it was just him and his mother, and a brother and sister who died years ago with no children. No one ever speaks of him, but he stays with me for some reason. I wonder if anyone remembers him. So many tortured souls that we talk so much about at the time. They make good stories.
He went off the road.
He was in, and he went off, and they said it was his heart. He was gone before he went off the road in
his truck.
Yes, he was in his truck, and he went off the road, and he's gone. I miss him. He liked to listen to the
baseball games.
Yes, he liked them. He went off the road. He was in his
truck. In his truck.
Yes, and he went off the road, and they said it was his heart. He was gone before he crashed, but he went off the road. I miss
Joseph.
Yes, he went off the road.
In his truck. After a heart attack, right, Will?
He was mine. I don't forget him. He was
your son. He was our son.
He went off the road. It was his heart. He was gone before he went off the road. He was
our son. I know you remember.
My daddy used to tell me when I was in high school.
Roger. I love Violet. He married Violet after my mama died. But just remember, your mother was a sweetheart. He never talked about her much after they got married, but he seemed worried I'd forgotten about her once I got older. He'd ask how much I could remember, and there is so little I can remember about my mama. Her dark auburn hair and her big brown eyes and her warm hugs and hearty laugh. It's funny. I have about 2 memories of her, and both times I upset her. The first time, she sent Daniel out to call me for supper. And I guess I wasn't through playing yet, so I took off running in the other direction. He ran after me, so I picked up a rock, threw it, and hit him in the face. He brought me back to Mama, and she was so upset. She had me bring her some switches from a nearby hedge, and she gave me the switching of my life for hurting my brother. And she had no mercy. None. And this other time, I must have been about 4 years old. I remember coming up the side steps to our kitchen. I must have been about 4 years old. Anyway, I was crying and hollering like 4-year-olds do, just saying, "Oh, I hate them. I hate them." And she picked me up and she said, "Don't say that again, Roger. Now don't say that. You don't hate anybody. And that's it. That's all I have left of are those stories. Now that my brothers and sisters are gone and we don't really know anyone from her side of the family. That's all I have of her. That's it. She was beautiful though. And kind. Violet, my stepmother, she was fine and she looked after me well enough, but she wasn't my mama. She never disciplined me, never laid a hand on me or even talked to me. If she had a problem, she'd send in Daddy to talk to me about it when he got home from work. She'd never say a word. She was fine though, and she was a good woman to my daddy, but she wasn't my mama. Now that my brothers and sisters are gone and Mama, died when I was so young. I wonder if even anyone remembers her. I doubt it. I imagine they're all gone. Most of the cousins on that side of the family were older than me.
Well, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan.
Millie grew up. We've been together in a marriage 62 years. So we've been together practically all our life. So you're getting a duet here. We met. I'll backtrack to my life a little bit. We lived in Detroit, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit. And her mother and her stepfather had moved down from Kentucky. Had migrated down from Kentucky. And they were working. She was working in the tank plant. During the Second World War, Detroit was the hub of it all. So they decided they wanted to get their daughter out of downtown Detroit. And my parents were in the suburbs. Well, they came and they were looking for a house. And they came out and saw a house and said, well, we like the house and all, but we're not going to buy the house unless our daughter likes it. Well, a week or 10 days later, they came and there she is. She came in and what can I say? From there all out, we were married 2 years later. We graduated from high school. We hadn't graduated from high school yet. And here we are. It's been a partnership all our lives. And it's taken us on a very good journey. A very interesting life's journey. We're happy and content with it at this point. I wish you could meet her. Meet her like she was. She was something. She's still my Millie, but my memory's fading and hers is nearly gone. A lot of who you are is in your memories. That's why I moved here, to this floor, so she could get more care. I could still be in that apartment, but I want to be with her. I can't be without her. Come here, honey. We did a lot of entertaining, you know. Important people. No matter where I worked, people would come up to visit, you know. Millie took care of all of it. Hosting parties, she was something. Whenever someone came in on business, I would host them at my house. So I'd invite them up to the house for dinner. And so they'd come up and Millie would cook for them, have them out for dinner and entertain them. And it got to be where, when I go into the plant, I'd be introduced as, this is Millie Holland's husband. And she was known for the greatest lasagna this side of Mama Leone's.
I think it's time to stop. I think it's time to stop.
Oh, I don't think so, honey.
Oh, go ahead.
You know a great memory our kids would love? We came back to Otis Air Force Base on Cape Cod. We piled in the car and drove up through Yellowstone. Oh, an interesting place on the way back was the President's... What was that? It escapes me. My memory is. It usually doesn't drop things 40, 50 years back, but it's getting worse. But anyway, our little girl was out there with us, and she was looking up at the mountain. And the college kids worked there, and they were great. So they got her up on the table, sang Babyface to her. Delightful.
I don't remember.
You don't remember?
Are you getting tired?
I'm okay. How are you feeling? Do you want to go to Vespers, hon?
I think it's too late for that now.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay, all right. Go in there down if you want to, hon.
I'll go if I want to. I think it's time to stop.
Hmm?
I think we should stop.
I don't think so, honey.
Oh, go ahead.
Let me walk with you, honey. We'll finish after dinner. She's hungry. Come to dinner with us. I'll finish after dinner. If you could have known her. If you could have known her back then. I tell you, I hope those are my last memories. We made a great life.
Are you getting tired?
I'll finish after dinner.
You know, there's one person I think about so often now. I never talk about her, and I want everyone to remember her.
Without me, she's just gone. She's just gone. You know, I have 4 beautiful boys. I've talked to you about all of them, right? Well, right in the middle, I had a girl. And she was stillborn. She was a beautiful baby with bright red hair and beautiful white skin. She took after the Scottish side. See, all my boys are dark like me. My Spanish father had strong genes, but my girl was white like her daddy. A little porcelain doll without freckles yet, since she'd never seen the sun. I remember that I held her for a long time before I let my aunt take her from me. She was born at home, like the others. I didn't want to forget her face, so I stared. She had chubby cheeks, very chubby cheeks. I think she would have had a round face, like Roger, and she had my nose, small and thin, and the thinnest lips. Those came from the Scottish side, those thin lips. I think they're nice, though. Maybe others wouldn't. They went well with her features. They were so small, and her brow wasn't very pronounced. She was a little round-faced angel with long, slender fingers and toes. I cried, and I cried. She was my girl, you know, my one girl. I love all my boys, and 2 out of the 4 didn't marry badly. The other 2, who knows what they were thinking. Oh, don't feel like you have to cut that out. They know how I feel. They agree with me. But I always missed my girl. You know, I used to write her letters and end them with, "I missed her," and I had to get back to taking care of my boys. The ones that God left here needed me. At each one of my boys' weddings, I'd imagine hers. I was never the mother of the bride. I was never the mother of the woman who had the baby when my grandchildren came. They all wanted their mothers to move in and help out those first few weeks. I visited a lot, of course. I always called first. I always wondered what it would have been like to have her here. I just don't want her gone with me. My husband never wanted to speak of her. It just made him too sad, and when I'd bring her up to my mother's or my sisters, they all told me that I needed to focus on my sons that needed me, and I did, and I adore them. I'm going to give this to them, to my sons, so that they have something of her. They never saw her. I am the last one alive that saw her, but she was here. I hope that I see her again and that I know her. There's just got to be something after this.
Don't you think?